Colt marveled at the golden sunset. He never imagined the forest would feel like this, wild and teeming with life, yet utterly peaceful. He thought he knew freedom after escaping the orphanage and wandering the city, but it wasn't until entering the forest that he felt like he found what he had been longing for. Back in the city, freedom had felt fragile. The thrill Colt had experienced during his escape had waned as the morning light brought the city of Aberdeen to life. Blending in with the bustling crowd should have been easy, but the sideways glances and wide berths from the passers-by made him keenly aware that his tattered orphanage clothing and bare feet marked him as an outcast. Despite this, his short time in the city had been novel and wonderful, but the thing that surprised him most was how easy it was to steal. Compared to the locked-down world of the orphanage, snatching food from the street vendors felt like child's play. He had been able to make off with a loaf of fresh bread and a beautiful red apple the size of his fist, with no trouble at all. But a lingering gaze from a uniformed constable was all it took to remind Colt that he could be returned to the clutches of the mistress at any moment. It didn't take long for him to realize that as long as he felt like a fugitive, he would never be free. But Colt's musings on liberty were cut short as his stomach reminded him that finding food in the wilderness wouldn't be nearly as easy as snatching apples from street vendors. When Colt woke the next morning, he pressed deeper into the forest, putting as much distance as possible between himself and the city. He kept an eye out for berries or anything edible among the vivid green underbrush, but so far he had found nothing. He was no stranger to hunger, but this was different. In the orphanage, he at least knew when his next meal would come or where he might find it. He was a novice here. When it came to swiping food from the pantry, he was a pro. But foraging in the woods was a skill he didn't have, causing a twinge of fear to mix with this hunger. Despite Colt's concern over his next meal, the soft grass, warm sun, and smell of spring seemed to capture all of his senses at once, distracting his mind from his stomach. There were too many new experiences to take in at once, but he did his best to soak in this moment he had dreamt of his entire life. He was also grateful for the morning sun. It wasn't only warm. He knew that as he traveled eastward, he was putting more distance between himself and Aberdeen, the orphanage, and Mistress Blythe. As he traveled further and the sun got higher, the forest came alive with birdsong. But Colt found himself drawn to an odd rattling noise that reminded him of the factorals near the orphanage. Jarring and mechanical, the sound felt strangely out of place in the pristine natural surroundings. After following the sound, he discovered that the source was a small black and white bird with a red head clinging to the side of a tree, using its beak to drill into the bark. He had read about woodpeckers in one of the damaged books that was donated to the orphanage, but that knowledge hadn't prepared him to notice the real thing. The experience reminded him of just how unprepared for life outside the orphanage he was. But it didn't deter him from traveling deeper into the forest and away from Aberdeen. It was his only option. Colt had just finished spitting out the last bits of a bitter tree nut when another odd noise caught his attention. An otherworldly melody drifting through the trees, like nothing he'd ever heard before, and completely different from the singing he would hear coming from the men in the factories. This was rhythmic and beautiful, with deep emotions woven into the sound. Colt couldn't describe what he was hearing, but somehow he knew that it was ancient. It even seemed as though the forest had composed a song meant for only him. For a brief moment, Colt had forgotten about his hunger. He had forgotten about the forest, and he was no longer interested in following the morning sun. Then he snapped out of it. After regaining some presence of mind, his first instinct was to keep his distance, knowing it must have been another traveler. He turned away from the music, determined not to cross paths with anyone. Yet, to his surprise, the volume seemed to grow, its beauty undeniable. A part of him wanted to get closer, but it wasn't the time to meet anyone, not this close to the city. Confused, it seemed the more he tried to focus on moving in the opposite direction, the louder the melody became, as if the sound itself were pulling him closer. Then suddenly, he again snapped out of stupor caused by the music, standing in a new area. He couldn't remember how he had gotten there, and he didn't know how much time had passed,
but the sun looked roughly in the same place. So gratefully, not much time could have passed. Once he had gotten his bearings a second time, Colt realized that despite his efforts, he had come in view of the source of the music. Not far ahead of him was a campsite that looked like it belonged in a fairy tale. Two men sat on a fallen log beside a smoldering fire, the thin tendrils of smoke weaving upward and disappearing into the canopy above. The older of the two had graying hair and a weathered but kind face, his head bowed, sliding his fingers across the wooden flute. The younger, larger traveler had the look of an athlete, with curly brown hair and a handsome face. He rotated a metal skewer, laden with meat, over the fire. The smell of roasting meat went directly to Colt's stomach, overriding his better judgment. His determination to avoid strangers and the risk of returning to the city suddenly didn't seem nearly as important as it had moments before. The melody from the flute and the aroma of seared meat had him bewitched. He was vaguely aware that a small, distant voice of reason was shouting from somewhere in the back of his mind, but to no avail, he crept forward. Staying low behind the underbrush, he thought he had gone unnoticed until he locked eyes with the piercing gaze of the largest eagle he had ever seen. Colt's breath hitched and his body froze. How had he missed this? Perched on another fallen log just beyond the two men was the largest bird Colt had ever seen, its gray feathers glinting in the dappled sunlight and its unsettling black eyes staring back at him. Though Colt had seen very few birds during his life in the orphanage, he knew that this creature was extraordinary. Could it be their pet? No, that didn't seem right. It was far too wild, too fierce, maybe a messenger bird of some kind. A hot, irrational thought stabbed into his mind. Poachers. They must have captured the eagle and were probably planning to sell it to a zoo or a circus. Colt's stomach turned as memories surfaced. Haunting images of the tiger he had seen at the carnival years ago, its fiery spirit extinguished under the cruelty of its handler. That same fury now boiled inside him, a flame burning away his hunger. The older man must be the trapper, and the big one the hired muscle. For years, Colt had imagined daring rescues for animals like that tiger, heroic escapes in which he was the savior. But those fantasies always ended the same way, with the grim reminder that he was a prisoner himself. Now, for the first time, he wasn't, and the thought sent a jolt of energy through him. It must have been the conflicting emotions, anger at the men, fear of being captured, the aroma of seared meat, and the beauty of the music that had distracted him. Yet somehow, Colt managed to focus on what was important and summoned the willpower to turn and slip away unnoticed. But as he turned, something else caught his eye, a bar of chocolate resting casually atop a leather shoulder bag near the older man. His stomach tightened as his eyes locked on the prize. Chocolate. His mouth watered. He hadn't seen chocolate since he was little, and even then, he'd never been allowed to taste it. His stomach clenched and his resolve shattered. The lure of the chocolate was too great to resist, hunger overriding his reason. A plan began to form in his mind, reckless and audacious, yet fully formed in an instant. He would introduce himself, playing the part of the lost and starving boy, and appeal to their pity. Surely they would offer him something to eat, maybe even the chocolate. Then he would sit closer to the older man, feigning interest in the flute. When the moment was right, he would pretend to reach for the flute, and in the resulting commotion, snatch the chocolate and disappear into the woods before they could stop him. The big guy looked strong, but Colt doubted he could catch him running through the trees. Again, he was dimly aware of a voice of reason shouting from somewhere in the back of his mind, muffled, as if coming from a locked chest, racked and bound in chains, struggling mightily but fruitlessly to escape. Despite this, Colt's absurd plan felt perfectly rational. He crouched lower, ready to set his ruse in motion, while the eagle's piercing gaze and the men's rugged appearance kept his heart pounding in his chest. He had spent the better part of his life playing a deadly game of cat and mouse with the most ruthless cat imaginable, and he had gotten away more often than not. Surely he could outwit these two. "Hello," Colt said, loudly enough to be heard but careful not to startle the group as he stepped into the clearing near the campsite. Both men instantly turned to look at him, alert but unworried. The music stopped immediately. It was the older man who spoke first, with surprising levity in his voice. "Hello there, young traveler. Come to join us for breakfast." Colt was taken aback. He hadn't expected to be invited to eat so quickly. Charity had never been part of his upbringing. Caught off guard, he responded, "I heard the music, then I smelled food. I haven't had anything to eat since yesterday morning." "Heard the music, you say?" the older man repeated, a curious note in his voice. "Told you," the younger man said curtly to his older companion. "No matter," said the older man, quickly dismissing the comment. He turned back to Colt with a warm smile. "My name is Patton Burgess. The strapping young fellow here is Creed, and the oversized bird is Aggie. She won't bother you, but she isn't friendly either. Best keep your distance from that one." Without the music, Colt's emotions grounded themselves once again, and he found himself staring at the eagle. Now that he was closer, something seemed off about the creature. He was transfixed by the deep blackness of her eyes. They were nothing like the black eyes of the mice back at the orphanage. Those eyes, though black, had always reflected a faint gleam of light. Aggie's eyes were cold, empty voids, filling him with dread, a completely different fear than the fierce, burning eyes of the tiger. "And what shall we call our young visitor?" Patton asked, breaking Colt's gaze away from the eagle. "Oh, Colt. My name's Colt. Pleasure to meet you." He made his way over to the log beside Patton, without another word or even a glance from Creed. "You're welcome to join us, Colt," Patton said warmly, handing him a skewer laden with steaming meat. "There's plenty, so eat up." "Thank you," Colt mumbled gratefully, eagerly pulling the meat off the skewer. It was tender and savory, instantly easing the gnawing hunger he'd felt since waking. As he ate, his eyes kept drifting toward the wooden flute, resting beside Patton. After hesitating, he finally asked, "The sound the flute made, I've never heard anything like it before." Patton's eyebrows lifted slightly. "Indeed. As a matter of fact, you're the first in quite some time to hear it. I was genuinely surprised to see you emerge from the trees." "It was beautiful," Colt began, glancing nervously at Creed, whose expression remained cold and suspicious. But something felt strange about it, like it was pulling me closer. Patton exchanged a brief glance with Creed, who returned a hard stare. Colt couldn't determine whether Creed's reaction was simply his nature or a silent message to his companion. Patton smoothly changed the topic. "So, which way are you headed? Into Aberdeen?" Caught off guard, Colt fumbled for an answer. No, actually. I'm coming from Aberdeen. I'm heading west. Lost, are you?" Creed interjected sharply, leaving Colt momentarily speechless. Coming swiftly to Colt's aid, Patton interjected gently, "No matter. The boy's business is his own. Though, if you're traveling west, it will be several days before you encounter another town. At least 3 days on foot." Colt didn't relish the idea of subsisting on bitter tree nuts for days, but mustered enough courage to reply, "That's fine with me. I don't mind the forest." Creed responded with a dismissive shrug, his tone somewhere between impressed and indifferent. Bold words from a hungry barefoot scarecrow. "Do you even know where you're going?" "I'll be fine," Colt retorted a bit more defensively than intended. Fortunately, neither man pressed the issue. Though his hunger was now satisfied, Colt couldn't forget the chocolate, his original reason for breakfasting with these strangers. Yet for the first time, he hesitated. Taking from Patton felt wrong. Never in his life had Colt been treated with such kindness. Creed's harsh demeanor felt familiar, and even comforting compared to Patton's unexpected warmth. Yet Colt doubted Patton's kindness was without motive. Perhaps the older man intended to kidnap him or exploit him as labor for their poaching. Indeed, things didn't add up. The giant eagle, their odd clothing, their strange accents, Patton's secretive behavior regarding the flute, everything felt suspicious. Colt's mind was made up. He needed to act now. "What kind of bird is that?" Colt asked, nodding toward the imposing eagle perched nearby. "She is a harpy eagle," Patton replied carefully. "They're among the largest flying birds in the world, usually friendly to humans. Aggie here is an exception. Friendliness isn't her nature." "Is she yours?" Patton hesitated. "She's our responsibility at the moment. But no, she doesn't belong to us," he answered cryptically, clearly withholding details. Colt noticed Creed subtly shaking his head, silently advising Patton against revealing more. Colt's suspicion flared. They were poachers. No better than the cruel ringmaster he'd witnessed years ago. Patton's kindness was a ruse, just like the charming ringmaster deceiving a captivated audience. And the flute. Patton must be using it like a Pied Piper, luring lost children to their doom. Panic surged within him. Colt abruptly stood, feigning a stretch. "Thanks for breakfast. I'd better get moving." Before either could respond, he dashed toward the trees. "Hey!" Creed's angry voice rang out behind him. But Colt didn't look back. He'd swiped the chocolate bar unnoticed, while Patton's attention had been fixed on the eagle. Hidden safely among dense foliage, Colt tore open the wrapper and bit into the chocolate. The sweetness overwhelmed him momentarily, but as he glanced back, his heart seized in terror. Aggie, the giant eagle, was no longer a mere bird. Her true form was revealed, a terrifying harpy, her face twisted with a cruel grin, teeth bared grotesquely. Her eyes were voids of pure darkness, and razor-sharp talons gleamed ominously. Fear paralyzed Colt, making his limbs heavy, movements sluggish like in a nightmare.